McIntyre. I am the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Wadesboro, North Carolina.
All right, and what do you do for a living?
Right. Well, I am a pastor, which means I am, in this context, a full-time employee of the church. So what I do for a living is a grab bag of things. I lead and plan worship, but also being a pastor is much more than that. For instance, I offer pastoral care for anyone who is in need of someone to talk to or someone to pray over. Mm-hmm. I'm a part-time community organizer in some way because I'm always trying to connect people to the kind of resources they need or work together with other organizations. We are a mission-driven church in a lot of ways, so that means even though I have an excellent mission team, I also do a little bit of mission coordinating to help with things like getting bags packed, applying for grants to help with utility assistance, just a lot of random things that you wouldn't expect. So when I think of what a pastor is, I often think of being a really good juggler. Mm-hmm. You're juggling lots of responsibilities as you try to walk together with your church and empower people to really be Christ's hands and feet in the community, to give them the resources and the support they need and the guidance they need to help make a real difference in the world. The word pastor actually comes from a word that means shepherd. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I am. I'm a shepherd that helps the flock, which is the church, be all that it can be.
So what are some differences that you do want to make in the world?
I am very committed to Jesus's call to be there for the oppressed, the lonely, and the vulnerable. Society in general is often set up in such a way that we prize the people who are strong and powerful, the winners. Mm-hmm. And we love to believe that people can do it on their own. What we see in Scripture is a very different understanding of the world. The people we should spend the most time and attention on are the people who are struggling, the people who need some help, because we're all connected and none of us can ever really do it on our own. Clear back in the Old Testament, all the way through Scripture, you see God telling people, care for the sick, care for the poor, lift up the oppressed, lift up the immigrant in your land. Be there together because we want to share God's love with everyone. So that's what I want on a global scale, to live into that message of who Christ is and what it means to be children of God, mm-hmm. that we all care for each other and support one another, and lift up those who are most in need of a helping hand, knowing that sooner or later everyone needs a helping hand, that we are a body together that does great work to transform the world. Locally, what that looks like is a lot of practical things. So I want to make sure that people in our community have enough food to eat. And we have some wonderful programs that help provide people with food, which is good, but I would love to also see the system transformed so that they don't have to ask for a handout, that there's always a more just way of handling how food is distributed in this country. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of utility assistance, and that is a beautiful thing. And I love that we can help people with their utility bills. What I would love to see is a shift within how our community works so that fewer people need that help, that they already have what they need. And sometimes that's teaching people, some personal responsibility, but also that's looking at the areas in the system that are unjust or that need tweaked or changed so that everyone has a better opportunity. I don't have all the answers, but what I can do is bring a commitment to the gospel and to Christ to the table as I say, here's an issue. How can we as a community work together to make things more just and equitable for everyone?
You talked a lot about the community outreach. Most recently, you had a close call with COVID.
I did.
So how, it was pretty obvious that the community did a lot of outreach for you.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. So back in March, when COVID first made itself extremely well known, our church took some pretty painful steps to kind of protect both our members and our community, that we believe really strongly that making some personal sacrifices were in order to preserve the health and well-being of others. So that included suspending indoor worship and transitioning to worship online. We did that strictly online for several months while we continued to do certain outreach, but almost everything was done somehow on the phone or over the internet, including fellowship time, pastoral care, lots of things. Then over the summer, we transitioned to having some services in our garden so that people could be together but be appropriately spaced. And also, at one point, my administrative assistant and I returned to inside the building so that we could do a lot more work, and then we would just see a few people as they came in and out as necessary. What happened a few weeks ago now is that I found out that my administrative assistant and I had both had a very significant exposure to COVID, which meant I needed to suspend everything that happened in the churches while we waited to see if we were going to test positive. Otherwise, I could be unknowingly infecting members of the congregation. And that was hard. It was hard to move back to doing everything online, especially from my home for 2 weeks. Because even before, I had at least been coming into the sanctuary to film Sunday service that streamed out. And you get a little stir crazy when you're stuck inside for 2 weeks with your 2 cats who wonder why you never go out. But I also wanted to be very open and honest about what was happening, because I didn't want my church members to be afraid that I was incredibly sick. I didn't want people to be afraid about their own exposure risks, so I walked through with them, what the options were if I knew there may have been one. We were very blessed in that I tested negative and that no one else who had come into the building was tested positive. So we had what was to me a very close call, and that was exactly why we've been doing everything we've been doing, even though it's hard. Because I found myself thinking, well, what if we hadn't found out in time? And what if I had been positive and we had a garden service and somehow what I had passed to someone else? And it was a horrible feeling what could have happened. What I appreciated the most about being stuck inside was I began to see how much the community that I love and want so hard to support supported me in return. So I was doing like a daily Halloween spooky story just to give myself something to count down to. And people were responding, we love these. Some people were like, I don't like ghost stories, but it's good to see you're still doing well. And people started leaving things at my door because they knew I couldn't go out. My biggest fear was running out of groceries because when I got the notice, I didn't have a chance, to go buy more stuff. I had what was in my apartment, and I knew I had enough for a week, but I wasn't sure about 2. It was going to get a little dicey. I didn't have to go through almost any of my groceries because I had a chair outside my door, and people kept leaving cups of coffee or like homemade dinners of comfort food, little notes, just things to make me feel loved and appreciated. And it was humbling in a way, because I try to do so much to help others, but I'm not always good about asking for help in return, and to have it just show up when I needed it, and when I was at a low point emotionally, was beautiful, and it was everything that I want the church as a whole to be. That's one of the reasons why I fell in love with Wadesboro when I first looked at moving down here a little over a year ago. I saw that this was a town where there was an opportunity to really come together and help one another and create something beautiful in spite of a lot of challenges. And being in quarantine, strangely enough, showed me that, yeah, I was right, that there's so much love here and so many big hearts. I mean, even the coffee shop sent me notes on my coffee. I think you wrote one, Amanda.
I did. I wrote "Made with Love."
Yeah. I took a picture of it. I put it up. Then the next one came with a note from the person who delivered it, James, and it said "Delivered with love." And I'm like, oh, now we're competitive. So it was a lot of fun and a really hard time.
So what's something that just felt right with Wadesboro? What's something that you fell in love with when you were coming down?
So, strangely enough, Wadesboro's even architecture looks a lot like the town that I grew up in. We didn't have former plantations, but we were an old oil and gas boom town. And so there were some very nice brick mansions and whatnot when you would roll into town. I come from a very small town, and a very friendly town. When I first came here, what I noticed was how friendly people were, how people spoke to one another on the street, and even the architecture looked a bit familiar. As I talked to folks at Oliver's and at the Speckled Paw, because they're like, you said you needed a coffee shop, here's the coffee shop. What I discovered was an attitude of people who were really interested in seeing what could be done next. And growing up in a place that lost a lot of its major industry and is struggling to revitalize and figure out what's next, I really felt connected to the story of how the cotton industry has in some ways drawn out, and how this whole area has been rethinking about what comes next. What I saw was similar challenges to what I had some experience with, but also a similar level of hope. And that is a level of hope and can-do-itness that you don't see in a lot of communities. And I thought, I can fit in here. I can make a difference here. I can work with people here. And I think we could do something great together. Because this is a community that has a big heart and is looking forward to the future, even with certain challenges that it knows it faces.
Going back, you said you moved here last year, right?
Yes.
So when you first moved here to now, is there anything that's changed for you?
So when I first moved here, I was concerned with how well I'd be able to actually incorporate into the community, because one thing that a few folks had said is that it's really hard to get to know people here if you're an outsider. Like, you can live here for a couple generations and you could still be not, a real Ansonian. And in some ways I get it. Like in the town I grew up in, my mother moved there over 40 years ago now. I had to think about how old I was to do the math. And there are still some folks who are like, oh, she's not, really one of us. But most people will say, she is. And that's what I discovered here as well. That trepidation was a little bit off, because yes, I'm still known as a newcomer. And yes, there are some people who are still like, oh, I didn't even know the Presbyterians had a new pastor yet. And I'm like, yeah, I've been here a year. But at the same time, there were so many people who were very warm-hearted and went out of their way to welcome me. I was really hoping to do more of that this spring and summer, because I figured I came down in October, get through January, and then I'll be settled. We're in a slower point of the church here. I can get to know people. COVID made that harder, not gonna lie. I didn't get to do a lot of the things that I was hoping I'd be able to do in a first year of getting out and really getting to know some of the special celebrations in town because everything's been different.
Mm-hmm.
But I have found a way to connect with people more deeply than I thought at places like coffee shops or like random online relationships that have been developing. And I may still be a newcomer, but I don't feel like I'm in a position where people would say, well, she's not really a part of this town. And so if anything, my love for Wadesboro has only grown as I've become more connected to people.
So do you feel like with Anson County as a community, the more you put into it, the more you are actually an Ansonian?
I think part of it is the more you put into it, the more you're going to be considered an Ansonian. But I think another aspect is the more you're willing to listen to people and get to know them, the more you're an Ansonian. A lot of people make a mistake when they come to a small place or a struggling place or a new place. They think that they are coming in with all the answers and they just need to teach people how to do things. They're usually wrong because they don't understand the context of where they're going. And one thing that works in one place doesn't just magically work somewhere else. 2, they're usually wrong because they come with biases about what they expect a place to be. And places don't usually live up to all those biases, but not everyone ever wants to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And 3, it's just a mistake because if you tell people that you're going to fix them, what they hear is that you don't value them as they are. And if you come in thinking you have all the answers, well, how are you ever going to learn and grow together? You have to meet people where they are and learn about what's going on and ask people to say, well, what do you think needs to be done? What do you think is great? What would you like changed? And how can I help with that? So I think to really become a member of the community, A, it takes time. B, it takes trust, which means you've got to build trust with people. And C, it takes a willingness to listen and then to discern together what a person can do to help and what is an appropriate level of engagement.
Is there a chance that you would have to leave Anson County to go on another call? Do you feel that you might be called somewhere else? How does that...
In the Presbyterian system, once you are called to a church, usually you are there until you and the church decide that you are no longer the right person for the position. And that can happen for a few different reasons. The first could be that the pastor and the church feel that the church's needs moving forward are not ones that the pastor is necessarily as adept at helping with.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, a church may find that it grows in membership and they're really looking forward to doing like more with youth programming or whatnot, or more with fundraising. And the pastor can say, well, the things I was good at have helped get us to the point that we're at, but for this next journey of your Christian faith, I'm not the person who can best help you grow in those ways. So it's time for us to part ways and for you to find a pastor who can do that. Another reason a pastor in a church may decide it's time to move on is the pastor may feel like they have accomplished all they can with the church and that they feel that there's another church out there who could benefit from them as well. So at this point, it's partially the pastor's spiritual growth and their sense of where God may be calling them next. There are some more unfortunate reasons why pastors sometimes leave. That would include shrinking finances that make it difficult to afford a pastor. It can include conflict within a church that the pastor does not or is not going to be able to resolve. And so they feel like another voice is needed at the table. Generally, though, the pastor and the church discern together that it's time. And that can be anywhere from a few years in the future to a couple decades in the future. It's not the same for any two churches. I anticipate being here a while. I don't know if that's what God's plan will be long term. First call pastors in our denomination usually stay with the church about 3 to 5 years. I would hope at this point to stay longer, but I'm also not going to say what God's plan is moving forward, because we'll find out together.
What's something that if God's plan calls you somewhere else, what's something that you'll take with you from Anson County?
Well, this is going to sound strange because it's COVID related, but all life is COVID related at this point. One thing that I will take from Anson County is to not disregard people's willingness to be creative and to try new things during hard times. Back in March, when we first said we need to not gather indoors for a while, a lot of people, a lot of well-meaning people, and a lot of very wonderful churches said, you know, we're small, we're aging, we're this, we're that. We're just going to not have service for a couple weeks of any kind, and then we'll be back, and it'll be fine. And I respect their decisions based on who they are. But this church said, you know, we're small. A lot of us are rather aging. We don't have great internet capabilities in the county often, but we want to do something. What can we do? And that transitioned into online worship, filmed from an iPhone. Because people worked with me and said, I can do the tech part if you can do this, that, and the other. And we worked with the Methodist Church to make it happen, so that it was 2 pastors working together and 2 musicians, and you know, just to make it work somehow, to be creative. I'm glad we did that, because we've been out for a lot more than 2 weeks. And a lot of churches had to struggle to come in later with something to do. I said I could put up a blog to help, and they said, that would be wonderful, do a blog. So I started that. But then my members have been wonderfully creative as well. The mission committee figured out how to keep offering utility assistance when you can't really have people gather in the building like they would usually do for that. And when funding became much tighter, because we rely on donations for that, and we rely on fundraisers like spaghetti dinners, and you can't have a spaghetti dinner during a pandemic. But they found ways. They got creative about how to do Bible study. They asked if we could do Zoom fellowship time. There are so many ways that people have been creative that I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated in a smaller, somewhat older congregation, because people say, oh, people won't do these kinds of things in the country. Yes, they will, if you give them a chance. And not everyone does, but that just means you have to find more ways of being creative. What I will take from Anson County when I eventually move onward at some point in my life is that people are loving and they are creative, and people can do amazing things when they work together, even when everyone feels on their own that it can't be done. That we get through things together, and we get through hard times together. Maybe not always as pristine as we would like to be, but even if we're a little banged up, we'll get through it, and we'll emerge better and stronger people because of it, because we had to work together.